Thank you so much. We now have an opportunity for questions, because Jeremy loves answering questions. I'm going to take them in groups of 3. Bear with me, because there's a lot of people in the room. So I've got the lady in the pink, the gentleman, yes, and then Laura over there. Thank you.
Manifesto is wonderful to hear. I've been waiting for 30 years to hear something like this that I could believe in and fight for. The question, though, is we have a huge issue in our area, which is fracking. We're delighted to see it in the manifesto, and we'd love to hear you say it as well.
Thank you. Gentleman behind you, please. The gentleman with the tie.
Thanks very much. Andy Bell, Channel 5 News. Mr. Corbyn, I know you don't want to set a target for immigration. Right, sorry, that's more like it. Andy Bell, Channel 5 News. Jeremy Corbyn, I know you don't want to set a target number for immigration, but can you simply say if you think it would be good for the country if the immigration level was reduced, if immigration came down?
And finally, Laura.
No, please, let's have respect for everyone who wants to ask a question, including members of the media. By the way, I'm a member of the NUJ.
Thank you. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News. Mr. Corbyn, to be crystal clear for our viewers, for good or for ill, you think it's time to pay for your ideas, to tax more, to spend more, and to borrow more.
First of all, thank you very much. The manifesto is absolutely clear. We believe that fracking is very damaging to the environment, and therefore Barry Gardiner has made the statements on that, and I'm sure you understand and accept them and the way that Barry has put them. And I thank Barry for the work that he's done on it. He's nodding in agreement, so it must be true. On the issue of immigration, there is immigration from all parts of the world. Those that have migrated to this country have made an immense, enormous and fantastic contribution to our society. Without those that have... those nurses that came from Jamaica, those doctors that came from India, those specialists that come from Germany, those that work in all aspects of our National Health Service, Education Service, industry, transport and so much else have helped to give us the living standards that we all have. And I think we should recognise our country owes them a great deal of debt and thanks for what they've done. We've also made it clear that people should not be brought into this country to work in poor conditions, on low wages, deliberately to undercut people that are already here in work on agreed conditions. And that the free movement that currently exists within the European Union, obviously at the time we leave the European Union, that free movement doesn't continue. We will negotiate a trade agreement with the European Union that will ensure tariff-free access to the European Union, and future migration will be based on a fair migration policy, a fairness towards our economy and our needs of our people, and an end to the undercutting and exploitation that goes with it. And I believe that a Home Office, led by Diane Abbott, will be fair and decent and reasonable in the way that it runs it. But bear in mind, if there hadn't been people coming here to work in our NHS, all of us would be in far worse health than we are at the present time. Let's remember that. And Laura, thanks very much for your question, and thanks for the way you put it. What we're proposing here is a rebalancing of our economy, a rebalancing so that there is proper levels of investment in infrastructure fairly across the whole of the UK, not totally in the London and the South East, but in every region of the country. And I think that is extremely important. And a National Investment Bank that will ensure that fairness is taken all the way through it. We will also be, yes, increasing wages through the living wage, a living wage of £10 an hour by 2020. That will actually lead to economic growth and higher spending within the economy. It will also lead to a slight reduction in work benefits because of higher wages, but it will also help to rebalance our society. And from a government that has borrowed more than every Labour government in history over the past 7 years, we really don't need lectures. We really don't need lectures from the Tories on this. We're there to invest for the future and invest for the good of all, and to ensure there is fairness across communities and across the regions of Britain. And you know what? Every other country in the world says, why does Britain invest so little and pay itself so little while it allows such grotesque levels of inequality to get worse? Let's turn it round and do it the other way.
Thank you. I've got a lady on the very back row, the gentleman who has the most splendid moustache I've ever seen, and the gentleman on the front row. Second most lovely.
Hi, Jeremy. I'm just wondering, is there any provisions, Scarlett over here, is there any provisions to basically fix the failing academies that we already have in our system for schools? Because my son is now 18 and he came out with no GCSEs because the schools failed him.
Peter Lazenby, Morning Star newspaper. Can anything be done about the shockingly biased media?
Hi, Jeremy. One of the problems people face in society, I think, is economic isolation. You see the number of high street banks that are closing down. You think it'd be a good idea if there was a network of banks on the high street, maybe utilising post offices to provide a bank for the people?
Thank you very much,
Jeremy. Scarlett, thanks very much for your question. We don't want to close schools. Indeed, we want to see there is proper investment in schools all across the country. And under Labour, head teachers won't be asked to take collections at the school gate in order to pay for teachers' salaries and teaching assistants' salaries. We will ensure there is decent and fair funding of all schools across Britain, not what is happening now, which is funding per pupil is being cut in the vast majority of schools, and the schools are paying the price for that, with oversized and supersized classes, overstretched teachers, and an insufficiency of teaching assistants and so many other staff within the school. We will ensure our schools are properly funded. Secondly, where there are schools that are failing, then I believe, and I'm sure Angela would agree with me on this, there has to be an effective and strong local education authority that can step in to make sure that the schools are properly funded. Because we are not convinced of the idea that every school should be accountable only to the Department of Education. We want a much stronger local community and family of schools and education, so we would want to bring free schools and academies within that family of local education in a mutually supportive environment. Because at its best, if one school recognises it's got a problem of achievement in, say, English or maths, then a school down the road might be doing very well in those areas. You learn from each other. But if you create competition between schools all the time, you reduce the ability to learn from each other. Our children need to grow up knowing that the whole community is working for them. To quote the African proverb, it takes a village to bring up a child, not just the parents immediately with them. And since you so kindly brought up the question of education, Tom Watson and I have just been discussing on our wonderful campaign bus coming here how exciting it's going to be when we introduce the Pupil Arts Premium so that every child gets a chance to learn a musical instrument in school. Peter, thanks very much for your question. You've noticed that some of the media are slightly biased against the Labour Party. This is sometimes said to be the case. Listen, we're very serious about ensuring there is freedom of information and a right to know in society. It was, after all, Labour who introduced the Freedom of Information Act. We also recognise that in many societies around the world, very brave journalists lose their lives or are assassinated because they've uncovered the truth about brutal regimes and abuses of human rights. Journalists and journalism and free press are intrinsic to a democracy and a free society. I fully understand that. But it's also important to ensure there is responsible journalism.
And you're watching Jeremy Corbyn launching Labour's Manifesto. At this stage, we're going to say goodbye to viewers on BBC Two, but if you want to keep watching Mr Corbyn, stay with us on the BBC News channel.
And Tom Watson is very clear on this, that we will protect the diversity of our free press and we will ensure there is diversity of all of our media outlets in this country so that everybody can take an informed opinion. And the point that Tony Cairns raised at the end about economic isolation, John McDonnell has put forward a very clear view that a high street bank is actually something that's quite important. It's part of our community. If you think about it, there's too many small towns, even medium-sized towns, where the town centre has been hollowed out, where various shops go, the banks go, and you get to a whole process of decline, and you end up with a town centre that is payday loan shops, bookies and fast food outlets and very little else. It's quite complicated, but with intelligent planning and good support, you can end up with a much more vibrant and effective town centres all across the country. And so John's proposal is that banks shouldn't be allowed willy-nilly just to close all their branches and leave some towns with no bank whatsoever. There's also the question of the promotion of other banks as well. Credit unions have grown a great deal in our society. I'm indeed a member of a credit union myself because I think they're a great way of helping people financially manage and helping them to get credit if they need it and get loans if they need it. I think those things are very important. There is also the role of the post office in this as an alternative source of banking, and indeed it was the Labour government of Harold Wilson that introduced the gyro account system in those days. And so we'd be looking, alongside the question of public ownership of Royal Mail, of the role that the post office will play in assisting people to get good banking. And again, that means you've got to keep post offices on the high streets of all our towns and cities in Britain.
Thank you. The next three, I am just going to go to journalists to prove how unbiased they are. So I've got Robert, I've got Sky, I've got Jack. Sorry, I'm going for Jack instead.
Who's first?
Robert's first, please.
Robert.
Hello.
Hi, Robert.
A couple of things. Most forecasters say that the main reason why the living standards of those on lower pay are set to fall over the next few years is because of the freeze on benefits. And I'm struck that you haven't promised to end the benefits freeze. Why didn't you choose to do that in your programme? And secondly, you've set out plans to spend about £50 billion a year more and tax companies and the rich by around £50 billion a year more. You've also got an ambitious programme of investment and an extension of public ownership to energy, the Royal Mail, water. How much do you intend to borrow additionally every year?
Thank you.
Yes, Faisal Islam, Sky News. Mr. Corbyn.
Oh, hi. Hi,
so you've described the manifesto as radical. The Independent Institute of Fiscal Studies has said that this is the biggest involvement of a government in the state since the 1970s. At the last election just 2 years ago, 2 million more voters felt that the Labour Party was too radical and insufficiently irresponsible. Why, outside of this hall, and the swing voters who will determine the election, why should they trust you to set their water rates, their gas bills and their train fares?
Thank you. And Jack.
Thank you. Jack Blanchard from The Mirror. Mr. Corbyn, when the manifesto leaked last week, a lot of these policies we put to an opinion poll, and they proved to be wildly popular. A vast majority of them people really, really like, but what they didn't like was you as leader. Why do you think that is?
Okay. Thanks for your question, Jack. It's all right, it's all right. It's not the cult of personality, don't worry about it. Robert, thanks very much for your question. Yes, increasing benefits is important, and clearly we're not going to freeze benefits. That is very clear. We're also looking at the perverse effects of the benefit cap on people and their housing accommodation, particularly in London and the centre of our big cities. You will be hearing more about that in the very near future. Secondly, on borrowing and investment, I've made it very clear that this government has borrowed because it hasn't invested, and it's borrowed more and more because it's invested less and less. And we end up with a process of almost managed economic decline relative to what we could achieve as a result of that. And so we're going to make it very, very clear that this will be a government that invests for the future in all parts of the country, because we have a grossly imbalanced process where the vast majority of transport infrastructure investment goes to London and the South East. And so one of our key commitments is a crossrail for the north, from Manchester across to Newcastle. Faisal and Jack, your questions are actually the mirror images of each other. Did you get together to decide who was going to ask which? No, it's all right. That's a joke. Don't worry about it. When people talk about the 1970s and our manifesto doing that, I simply say that the other major party contesting this election is really, really forward-looking. They're going to bring back fox hunting and grammar schools. That sounds really 21st century, doesn't it? And so, yes, I've made it very clear, and John McDonnell will set out this in great detail tomorrow. Every one of our commitments is costed and funded. All of our borrowing commitments are there, out there in the open of what we would do. And you say the manifesto was leaked last week. Yes, many people got an advance copy of it. Well, they read it anyway. The opinion polls that have tested the policies individually have found them all to be very, very popular indeed. I just say this. I am very, very proud to lead this party. I was elected by a very large number of members and supporters, ordinary people all over this country, in trade unions, Labour supporters, Labour Party members. And I'm very proud that we have a party that is diverse, that is inclusive, that is pluralistic. And this manifesto is a product of that process. I see leadership as not dictating, but leadership is also about listening. Listening to what people say, understanding the stress, the pressures and the tensions in their lives, and ensuring that our party's policies, our government's approach to things reflects the reality of people's lives. I'm very proud to represent an inner city community in London, and I love the community, and I listen very carefully to what they all say, as I do on all the travelling around the country. The function of leadership is to understand the stresses that people face in their daily lives, the frustrations, the thwarted ambition, the anger that they face, and try to produce policies that make that different. Being strong and standing up doesn't necessarily mean shouting, dictating, and instructing. It's how you put your case. So, as you well know, I do not indulge in personal abuse. I think it's appalling, the abuse that's thrown at individual colleagues in the shadow cabinet, in the trade unions, the appalling abuse that's thrown around on the social media, and the very dark places it drives people into when that abuse takes place. So I want to set an example that you don't indulge in that. You debate the issues that we all face and come to solutions that we can all collectively accept and be enthusiastic and excited by. And you know what? This is something that has brought more than 500,000 people into membership of our party because they're excited about what we can do together for the good of everybody else.
Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, thank you to all of you. Thank you to all of the colleagues that have made this amazing document, which we're very proud to stand by. And ladies and gentlemen, with your support, your hard work and your dedication over the next 3.5 weeks, please say thank you to your next Prime Minister.
Let's all gather around.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.